Welcome back. You're here for the second study on the true measure of man by Richard E. Simmons. I'm going to remind you that these studies and these comments I'm making are mine alone. Richard wrote the book. I'm merely commenting on the book. The chapter we're going to hit today, chapter 2, is entitled Life After All is Difficult. We all know the guy that we see in life. He's the fantasy figure that's skating through life, eyes semi-closed, skating along with his hands behind his back, scarf blowing, wind ruffling his hair. He doesn't have one problem. The only problem with that is that guy really doesn't exist. You may think he does. You may think there's people out there that are going through life and don't have a concern, but they really are not there. My wife tells me sometimes when I complain that I compare my insides, the way I feel, my fears and anxieties, with the outside or the way others look. And to me, they look like they don't have a fear in the world. But to me, I feel like I have a lot of fears in the world. And so if I do that, I never measure up. Simmons quotes Ecclesiastes 7:29 in the chapter, and he says, "This only have I found. God made mankind upright, but men have gone in search of many schemes." That God made us correct, but we have gone in search of many schemes. We've schemed to be someone different than we really are. And these will necessarily complicate our lives. And these problems, and sometimes complex problems that we find ourselves with, many times are based on our comparison to others. See, the truth is that all of us in some way are living desperate lives. We are especially as men in that category. I was floored when I read his quote on page 8 that he points out 80% of the suicides in America are carried out by men. 80%. And then he quotes on page 9 Newsweek, and Newsweek says that 6 million men are diagnosed as being depressed. But there are, in fact, millions of men who suffer silently undiagnosed. And our definition of success does not include one of depression, anxiety, or sadness. So successful men, or so we think, are upbeat and are surrounded by other successful men. And they certainly aren't alone and uncertain, or so we think. Page 11 is a cornerstone in this chapter and probably in this book. He says, we measure our success based upon what others think of us. Our audience becomes our judge and jury. So the real question then to us is, what do others think of me? And he says it here on page 11. What will people think about me? What do they think? And what they think is important to me because they are the ones that I believe control my happiness. I am looking for the reaction of somebody to tell me whether I am in fact content and whether I am in fact happy. And it is easy to be dependent on what others think of me. And on page 13, he actually asks those questions. What do they think about what I do? How do you rate what I do? A friend of mine one time was talking to me and I said, I don't know what that guy thinks about me. And my friend laughed at me and he said, guess what? He's not even thinking about you. So Simmons ends this chapter on page 14, and it's this quote by Bill Thrall. Bill Thrall, in a book called True Faced, states that eventually all of our masks will crack, and inevitably our true selves will be exposed. So what Thrall says, and what Simmons agrees with, is that eventually we'll crack. If I'm thinking about it, if I'm fearful, am I anxious, those fears and thoughts will be exposed. Here's a couple questions I want you to cover. 4 of them, in fact. In what areas do men feel like they are not measuring up? Think about home, work, and social. Number 2, have you known someone whose productivity and vitality was hindered because they felt that others thought less of them? What were those circumstances? Now, don't share any names, but what were the circumstances that led to that? Third question is, have you ever been in that place? Now, this may take a little courage to share, but it'll be good for you in the group if you could say, yes, sometimes I'm afraid, and here's what I'm afraid of. And finally, what is the antidote to the feeling of not measuring up? I want you to think about, what am I doing with my feelings of not measuring up? Have that discussion, and you'll be ready for chapter 3. Thanks.